Not only can the heavenly bodies not impose a necessity on human choice, but neither do the bodily effects in these inferiors necessarily proceed from them. For the impressions of universal causes are received in effects according to the manner of the recipients. But these lower things are flexible and do not always behave in the same way, because of matter, which has the potential to take many forms, and because of the contrariety of forms and virtues. Therefore, the impressions of the heavenly bodies are not received in these lower ones by way of necessity. Again, from a cause removed, the effect does not necessarily follow unless there is also a necessary middle cause, just as in syllogisms from the greater of the necessary and the lesser of the contingent, the conclusion of the necessary does not follow. Now the heavenly bodies are remote causes, but the proximate causes of the lower effects are the active and passive virtues in these lower ones, which are not necessary causes, but contingent, for they may fail as in the few. Therefore, effects do not necessarily follow from the heavenly bodies in these lower bodies. In addition, the motion of the heavenly bodies is always in the same way. If therefore the effect of the heavenly bodies in these lower ones proceeded from necessity, they would always behave in the same way as those which are in the lower ones. But they do not always behave in the same way, but as in most cases. Therefore they do not come from necessity. Still, one necessary thing cannot be made out of many contingencies, because as each of the contingencies by itself may fail of effect, so all together. Now it is certain that the particulars which take place in these lower bodies from the influence of the heavenly bodies are contingent. Therefore, the connection of those things which happen in the lower ones through the influence of the heavenly bodies is not necessary. For it is clear that any one of them can be prevented. Further, celestial bodies are naturally acting, which require matter in which they act. Therefore, what matter requires is not removed from the action of the heavenly bodies. Now the matter in which the heavenly bodies act are the inferior bodies, which, since they are corruptible according to their nature, as they can fail from being so from working, and so their nature is such that they do not necessarily produce effects. Therefore the effects of the heavenly bodies do not necessarily come from the lower bodies as well. But someone might say that it is necessary that the effects of the heavenly bodies should be completed. Yet this does not remove the possibility from lower things, because every effect is in potential before it takes place, and is then said to be possible. But when it is already in action, it passes from possibility to necessity. And all this is subject to celestial motions, and thus it is not ruled out that sometimes an effect is possible, although it is necessary to produce that effect sometimes. For thus, Albumassar, in the first book of his introduction, endeavors to defend the possible. But it is not possible that it can be defended in this manner, for something is possible which follows from the necessary. For what is necessary to be is possible to be, for what is not possible to be is impossible to be. And that which is impossible to be must necessarily not be. Therefore that which must be must not be. But this is impossible. Therefore it is impossible for something to be necessary and yet not be possible for it to be. Therefore being possible follows from being necessary. Now it is not necessary to defend this possible against the fact that effects are said to be caused by necessity, but against the possible which is opposed to the necessary, as it is said possible that which can be and not be. Now nothing is said to be possible or contingent in this manner, merely because it is sometimes in potentiality and sometimes in actuality, as the above answer supposes. In act, but sometimes indeed in act, and sometimes in potential, which however are necessary when demonstrations are given of these things. But what is possible or contingent, which is opposed to necessity, has this in its nature, that it is not necessary that it should be done when it is not. This is because it does not necessarily follow from its cause. For in this way we say that it is contingent that Socrates should sit down, but that he himself should die is necessary because according to these things it necessarily follows from its cause, but not first. If therefore it necessarily follows from celestial motions that their effects are sometimes to come, the possible and the contingent, which are opposed to the necessary, are removed. It must be known, however, that in order to prove that the effects of the celestial bodies proceed from necessity, Avicenna in his Metaphysics uses such an argument. If any effect of the heavenly bodies is hindered, it must be by some voluntary or natural cause. But every voluntary or natural cause is reducible to some celestial principle. Therefore, the hindrance also of the effects of the celestial bodies proceeds from certain celestial principles. It is impossible, therefore, that if the whole order of heavenly things be taken at once, that its effect should ever cease. Hence, he concludes that what the heavenly bodies do must necessarily have effects in the lower ones, both voluntary and natural. But this reason, as Aristotle in 2 Physics he says, there were some of the ancients who denied chance and fortune by the fact that the effect of each is determined by some cause, and when the cause is given, the effect is given of necessity. And thus, since everything proceeds from necessity, it is not something accidental or casual. But he himself solves this argument in 6 Metaphysics by denying the 2 propositions which this argument uses. One of these is that whatever cause is given, its effect must be posited. For this is not necessary in all causes, because a cause, though it be by itself and proper the cause and sufficient of any effect, may nevertheless be hindered by the concurrence of another cause, so that the effect does not follow. There is another proposition which he denies, that not everything that exists in any way has a cause in itself, but only those things which exist in themselves. But those things which are by accident have no cause. Just as the fact that he is a musician has some cause in a man, but that a man is both white and a musician has no cause. For whatever things are together because of some cause, they have order to one another from that cause. But things that are by accident have no order to one another. Thus, therefore, when some effect is intended, we shall say that it had some cause from which it did not necessarily follow, because it could be prevented from some other cause by an accident. And although it is possible to reduce that concurring cause to some higher cause, yet the concurrence itself, which prevents it, is not to be reduced to some cause. And so it cannot be said that the hindrance of this or that effect proceeds from some heavenly principle. Hence it is not necessary to say that the effects of the heavenly bodies necessarily proceed in these lower ones. Hence it is that Damascenus says, in the 2nd book, that the heavenly bodies are not the cause of the generation of anything that is made, nor of the corruption of what is corrupted, because, of course, effects do not necessarily proceed from them. Aristotle also says in 2 De Somno et Vigilia that many of those things which are in the bodies of even celestial signs, such as waters and winds, do not happen. For if another more violent movement occurs than that of which the future is a sign, it does not take place, just as many well consulted, which were expedient to be done, are dissolved because of other more worthy beginnings. Ptolemy also says in a quatrain, Again, we must not esteem that the above proceed inevitably, such as those which happen by divine disposition, and which are in no way to be avoided, as well as those which proceed truthfully and from necessity. In Quadripartitum, he also says, "These judgments which I deliver to you are the means between the necessary and the possible."